people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. An update on an ongoing situation as a result of this past weekend's action over there in Scotland. The Jaren versus Alejandra Ayala fight. It appears that post-fight, Alejandra was hospitalized and put into an induced coma in Glasgow after she was knocked out by Jaren. According to the British Boxing Board of Control, the Mexican had suffered a subdural hematoma for which she underwent surgery, and her current state is in an induced coma, pending her evolution. It's eerily similar to what we saw last year between Jeanette Zapata and Marie-Pierre Huel. Jeanette Zapata, who succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. I'm not going to make any bones about it. I hope that Phoenix Ayala doesn't share the same fate. Prayers go out to her that she makes a speedy recovery. Unorthodox Boxing Gear took to their social media to react to the news and stated, women and girls have been documented to have a higher number and more severe symptoms than males. In some studies, women have been found to have longer recovery periods than males and more prolonged concussion symptoms. Trauma to the head. The jostling of the brain. What's going on inside the skull at the time a punch lands? It seems that some literature out there suggests that women are more prone to concussions than males. And this is why the WBC has been standing on their square when it comes to women and 3-minute rounds. The 3-minute round, which is often brought up in the sport of women's boxing, when exactly will that change happen? It's situations like this that make the powers that be hesitant. I mean, it's not like it doesn't happen in men's boxing, it actually does. But men are still allowed to fight for 3 minutes. Though at the same time, if some literature and medical studies suggest that women are in fact more prone to concussions than males are, then perhaps extending the length of a round to 3 minutes instead of just 2, perhaps that's not a wise idea. It really all depends on who you ask. If you ask Unorthodox Boxing Gear, they state, hence the reason why I am an advocate for 2-minute rounds. The studies clearly show the differences in the sexes on concussion. We do not want to further put these women and girls at risk. The answer you get when it comes to 3-minute rounds really all depends on who you ask. Some fighters I've spoken to are for it. Some are against it for various reasons. Some boxers that I've spoken to that are for the 3-minute round in women's boxing seem to suggest that for aesthetic purposes, in order to make fights more entertaining by way of more knockouts, the length of a round should be extended. Though in that way, that makes things riskier for the girls now, doesn't it? In a manner of speaking, it does. And this added minute to the length of a round, does it come with any additional finance? Any additional pay to the fighters, as fighter pay is also a recurring talking point when it comes to the sport of women's boxing. I've always taken a stance to where if the money ain't gonna be no different, then there ain't no sense in doing more work. There ain't no sense in extending the length of a round for the same kind of pay that the ladies have been getting. Until fighter pay changes and more doors open, more opportunities, bigger purses for the fighters, bigger compensation for the risks, there shouldn't be added risks involved. I personally like the high-paced fighting of a 2-minute round anyway. Some fighters argue in favor of a 3-minute round. Some don't. Some argue against it, and some are indifferent. To some fighters, it makes no difference. It really all depends on who you ask. Though, outside looking in from where I'm sitting, the girls shouldn't have to fight for an extra minute every single round, given the kind of money they're being paid. Why give them more work for the same money? Stands to reason. And it's not like knockouts don't happen, even with 2-minute rounds. If the idea is to add an additional minute to a round in order to produce more knockouts and thereby bring more eyes to the sport, well, there's plenty of girls getting knockouts even with 2 minutes. I mean, both times Cecilia Brækhus fought Michaela Lauren, she knocked her out. Both times in both fights. You think about the first Hannah Gabriel's Oxandia Castillo fight. Oxandia knocked out Hannah Gabriel's after just 2 rounds. Look at what Savannah Marshall did to Hannah Rankin and Lolita Musea. Look at what she did to Femke Hermans in her last fight. Look at Senicia Estrada.
Look at what she did to unbeaten Maria Santizo late last year. She stopped her in 4 rounds.
I don't really think it's a requisite. I don't think it has to be a 3-minute round in order for you to produce knockouts when there are fighters out there that have been producing knockouts. It's not a requisite that a round be a 3-minute round in order for a fighter to rack up a knockout. It's not even a requisite that a round be a 3-minute round for a fight to be an entertaining fight. Case in point, a few weeks ago, Taylor versus Serrano. That was a very entertaining fight. 2-minute rounds.
You think about what happened to Ginette Zapata last year.
And the current condition, the current situation with Alejandra Ayala over there in Scotland, and you really do have to wonder, is it worth it, adding that additional minute to the round for entertainment purposes? I mean, if you ask me, the issue isn't even whether or not the fights are entertaining. Many of the fights are entertaining. The real issue is exposure and marketing. If the basic idea is to add an additional minute to a round to produce more knockouts and thereby enhance the entertainment value of a fight, that's really not necessary. Knockouts still happen, even with 2-minute rounds. And fights that don't end in a knockout, many times they're still entertaining fights. Bridges versus Courtenay. So it's really not necessary. If this is all intended to be a way to enhance the appeal of the sport, all you really need to do is...
Fighters just need more marketing and more exposure.
Big platforms airing women's fights, affording those fighters that many more opportunities.
Sport's already appealing. The fights are already entertaining. They just need more exposure.
What you need is more marketing, not more minutes. I hope that Alejandra Ayala comes out of this and makes a speedy recovery. And I think that people need to think long and hard as to whether or not an additional minute, a 3-minute round, 3-minute rounds, as to whether or not that's the answer they're looking for, and is it really worth it?
Because this situation occurred in a fight that had 2-minute rounds.
10 2-minute rounds in the 10th and final round. Sport's dangerous enough as it is. You want to make it more dangerous. In men's welterweight news, I didn't get the chance to react to Jaren Ennis' stellar knockout of the then unbeaten up-and-comer Custio Clayton of Canada, guy who's actually a former Olympian. I was really intrigued by this fight, really interested in how it would play out. I didn't make any bold claims or any bold predictions,
No, I didn't make any bold proclamations. I just wanted to enjoy the show.
From where I was sitting, this would be a more accurate gauge for Jaren Boots Ennis' talent level than what we've seen in the past, with a very pasted Thomas Dulorme, a fish out of water at welterweight in Sergey Lipinets. This guy seemed like a more capable guy, at least on paper. Custio Clayton did. And, Jaren dispatched him in 2 rounds. It's not a fight that leaves you with very much to reflect upon except the power and the accuracy. It is real that he could do that to an unbeaten guy.
A former Olympian who's known for being defensively responsible.
It only lasted 2 rounds. I gave the first round to Jaren Boots Ennis, who was very busy with the lead hand, the jab hand, making it very difficult for Custio Clayton to get off any punches. I mean, I don't think he landed anything in that round.
The whole round, I don't think he landed anything.
Hindsight being 2020, if he did land anything in that first round, it didn't make a difference as he got taken out in the second. It's a situation to where anybody who sees Jaren Boots Ennis can see the skill, the talent, the ceiling that this kid has. But it's all for nothing if they can't get him high-profile fights, and therein lies the dilemma. This past weekend's fight was an IBF final eliminator. But we all know, just because Jaren Ennis is the mandatory challenger to one of Errol Spence Jr.'s belts, that doesn't guarantee him Errol Spence Jr.
Least of all when Errol says he's supposed to be fighting Terrence before this year is out.
Let's be honest. A Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. undisputed welterweight title fight takes precedence over a mandated title defense against Jaren Boots Ennis. One fight is obviously more important than the other, and one fight is obviously bigger than the other. So I could actually forgive Errol Spence Jr. not fighting Jaren Boots Ennis so long as he fights Terrence Crawford. And we'll see if he does.
I'm telling you now, I don't expect Errol's ever going to fight this kid.
Jaren Boots Ennis is the next wave of fighter, you understand. The next wave of fighters, Jaren Boots Ennis, Montes Stanionis, Conor Benn, some others. That's what they are. They're the next cycle, the next crop of welterweights. And with those things in mind, I don't actually expect Errol or Terrence to fight one of these guys. I don't.
Nah.
But somebody has to.
I expect that Errol and Terrence might decide to settle up with each other.
Maybe they do. And if they do, the winner of the fight, whoever ends up being this division's undisputed champion, they'll likely move up to junior middleweight. The loser might as well.
Yeah, I don't really expect either guy to stay at 147 pounds if that fight actually happens.
But if neither one of those two guys end up fighting Jaren Boots Ennis, how's he supposed to cross over? It's about time that Showtime puts some money behind this guy. They need to. They need to incentivize him as an opponent for
your Danny Garcia, for your Keith Thurman.
Look, I'm being honest. I don't expect a young unbeaten fighter like a Montes Stanionis, who's in a very similar situation to Jaren Boots Ennis, to where he's just, one fight away from fighting for a world title, one fight away from potentially becoming a world champion. I don't expect a Montes Stanionis to take on a Jaren Boots Ennis, because nobody's going to put their unbeaten up-and-comers in harm's way when they're so close to fighting for a title. So I don't expect Stanionis to take on Jaren Boots Ennis, but these other guys, these former champions, these seasoned guys.
I think that's the next ideal step for Jaren Boots Ennis.
The Showtime is so obviously invested in this fighter, they went as far as making him the co-main event to Charlo versus Castaño 2. They're grooming him to become a somebody, but he needs names in order to do that. Don't get me wrong. The hardcores might be impressed with what Jaren Ennis did to Castillo Clayton, but can he do that to a more familiar face, a more familiar fighter, perhaps a former champion? You got guys like Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia. They ain't got belts and it's just taking up space.
They think every time they get out there, they're supposed to get paid an arm and a leg.
Something's got to give. And I get the sense that what the both of those boys are doing, they figure, even if they can't get either Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. in the ring, what they can do is bide their time, play it safe, wait for those guys to fight, wait for the outcome, wait for the winner to move up and wait so that the titles go vacant and the reset button can be hit on the division. And this is what I mean when I say these guys are just taking up space. It's up to Showtime to incentivize Jaren Boots.
Match either Danny Garcia or Keith Thurman against Boots on a pay-per-view.
Can't be any worse than putting Keith Thurman on pay-per-view to fight Mario Barrios. This is different. You're actually grooming the future of Showtime boxing, a guy who many people are heralding as the future of the welterweight division. In that way, it's an investment in the future. You might have to put it on pay-per-view so that Keith will get the kind of money he's looking for, Keith or Danny.
Because I figure it's going to take a lot of fucking money to get one of those guys in the ring with Jaren Boots Ennis.
So you guarantee one of those boys 1.5 mil, maybe two up front, and let the rest come from the pay-per-view's upside. Incentivize Jaren Ennis as an opponent so that he can knock one of those guys' blocks off, whether it's Keith Thurman or Danny Garcia. And that will be Jaren Ennis's crossover fight, as neither of those guys have ever been stopped. They've suffered some losses, but they've never been knocked out. Jaren Ennis could be the first to do it, and if he does, he crosses over.
If Terrence and Errol are supposed to be fighting later on this year before this year is out,
and Jaren Boots Ennis is the mandatory challenger to the winner of that fight, you ain't got all fucking day.
You've waited long enough to do this fight, now you're on the clock.
I mean, this past weekend's fight with unbeaten Castillo Clayton, then unbeaten Castillo Clayton, are we to assume that that's going to be Jaren Ennis' only fight this year, or is he going to get back out there at some point, perhaps in the summer, fall, or winter months? Because if he does, he's going to need a dance partner, and it can't be a step backwards from a Castillo Clayton. I don't know, maybe you get him Radzav Butaev.
Maybe you get him Jamal James.
You got to get him somebody, though. If the aim is to turn him into a crossover star, the next welterweight pay-per-view attraction, you've got to get him somebody with a profile, a high-profile guy like a Danny Garcia or a Keith Thurman. In the greatest scheme of things, they ain't got much of a profile, but as far as welterweights go, these are the somebodies.
It'd be a coming-out party for Jaren Boots Ennis if he knocks one of those guys out.
Something's got to give. That's all I'm saying. If it's Showtime's intention to pass the torch to Jaren Boots Ennis, a guy like Castillo Clayton, solid fighter that he might have been, that won't turn Jaren Boots Ennis into a crossover star. You've got to put him in there with a familiar face, a familiar fighter that people have seen in action many times before.
Something's got to give. That's all I'm saying.
He's got the tools, but it's up to the platform, the promoters, and the powers that be to get him maximum exposure.
If they want him to cross over, it is.
And finally, Eddie Hearn himself has released a preliminary number in reference to the buy rate for the Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol pay-per-view, and he states it's through 600,000, but everyone is very happy. You will get further news soon.
Now, I saw a number being floated out there.
The number was approximately just north of 100,000 pay-per-view buys off the app, off of the DAZN platform. platform, because whether you're aware of it or not, Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol as a pay-per-view wasn't just being distributed by DAZN. That wasn't the only platform showing that pay-per-view here stateside. So
I don't know if this 600,000 Eddie Hearn is talking about includes that initial 100,000.
that initial 100,000 that is reported to have been generated by way of another platform, another pay-per-view distributor. Your guess is as good as mine, but Eddie Hearn says that information will be made available. It seems that DAZN is starting to publish their own numbers,
like they did with the Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano fight.
Now, some are taking the number at face value and interpreting the number as being an encouraging number for DAZN. That is still very much making their bones in the U.S. market. Some people are looking at that number and telling themselves, that's really not bad, because that's a very difficult number to hit in the American market. Whereas some others are looking at that number with a lot of skepticism. They don't want to believe it from Eddie Hearn. One guy that goes by the name of Ranger Rollins says literally zero chance that is true, or even approximating a number that approaches to. And I don't know, maybe he thinks he knows about DAZN's
Who's he?
inner workings.
What, he knows more about it than Eddie Hearn?
Well, he seems to think so, and you can make of that what you will. Being honest, I don't get my news or my viewing figures from anybody named Ranger Rollins, so it really doesn't matter what the skeptics think about it. I'm going to take these viewing figures at face value, the way I always do, whether they're coming from Mike Coppinger, Eddie Hearn.
Yeah.
I mean, bear in mind that this Ranger Rollins guy typically is a PBC shill, a guy who believes whatever viewing figures are put out there in reference to PBC shows and PBC's pay-per-view buys, but he wants to turn into
But all of a sudden, he's real fucking skeptical when it comes to DAZN's viewing figures and DAZN's pay-per-view buys.
even when it's in reference to a Canelo Alvarez fight. Canelo Alvarez, the face of boxing in this country. Yes, he might have lost his very last fight, he might have, but he still draws more than anybody else in the United States. And in his very last fight, the one before this one, he drew approximately 800,000 pay-per-view buys on the Showtime platform. So why wouldn't he be able to draw a comparable number on DAZN?
It's not the first time he's fought there.
Far from it. When he fought Daniel Jacobs, when he fought Sergey Kovalev, when he fought Callum Smith, Avni Yildirim, and Billy Joe Saunders.
When he broke the indoor attendance record.
Remember?
He drew over 70,000 people to watch him fight an unknown Brit.
This is not the first time that Canelo Alvarez has fought on DAZN. His fans, his followers, they know where to find him. So the idea that the fight might have drawn upwards of 600,000 pay-per-view buys is entirely possible and plausible.
At a price point of $80 to new subscribers.
$60 to existing subscribers, what you're looking at is roughly $48 million.
Not including gate revenue.
Monthly subscribers to DAZN here stateside would have put up their $20 for their monthly subscription, in addition to the $60 for the pay-per-view. New subscribers would have had to have paid $80.
It all rounds out about the same.
That is approximately $48 million. And these guys like Ranger Rollins, these skeptics, they don't want to believe that Canelo's drawing power transcends platforms, that he's a draw, whether he's on Showtime or DAZN, all the same. He's going to draw. He's going to do his numbers, and his numbers are always better than the PBC's numbers.
Without him, anyway.
These guys like Ranger Rollins, they want to believe that fighters like Gervonta Davis and Errol Spence Jr. come anywhere close to Canelo Alvarez in terms of drawing power, and time again, what they find out is they don't.
Even when he's fighting on the same platform as them.
The fight before last, he did. You tell me which one of those guys generates 800,000 pay-per-view buys.
600,000 on DAZN is a good number.